Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about ransomware, and a main attack vector is phishing emails. But there's another very large problem that comes from malicious emails, and that is BEC, or business email compromise. In fact, the FBI's IC3 reported that there were more than $4.2 billion in losses tied to cybercrime in 2020, and BEC accounted for 60% of that. So we're going to talk about that today. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, this is Chris Brandt with Sandesh Patel. Welcome to another FUTRtech video podcast. Business email compromise is hitting businesses and consumers hard, and I'm sure everyone has seen these types of attacks in their inbox. Everything from fraud and romance scams to crypto scams and everything in between. It's a lucrative business. Today we have with us Mike Britton, CISO for Abnormal Security, a platform that uses a human behavior security engine for blocking email attacks, including phishing, malware, ransomware, social engineering, executive impersonation, supply chain compromise, internal account compromise, spam, and gray mail. Mike is here to tell us all about how business email compromise works and how to protect against it. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be here.
It's awesome having you. We've heard so much about abnormal security in the field, so it's really exciting to have you guys on here. But before we get into that, can you just tell us a little bit about, what abnormal security is and what was the, sort of founder idea in starting abnormal security, and how did that all come together?
So Abnormal Security is about a 3-year-old company, and the founders started out in ad tech. And so they, a lot of the technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence of things like targeted ads or things like Netflix knowing what you want to watch next. There's a great data science behind that. And our two founders, they had a business. It sold to Twitter. It became the engine behind Twitter's behavioral ad tech services that they provided. And they did that for a while, and then they decided, hey, we want to go do something bigger. We want a bigger mission in life than just ad tech. And so they went on a bit of a listening tour. They talked to over 100 CISOs across various enterprises and said, what keeps you up at night? And so the overwhelming thing that they heard was email security. It's, everyone has tools and everyone does all the necessary things to try to protect their users, but it's still a problem. As you alluded to from the IC3, billions of dollars in damages every single year. And so they looked to take that knowledge and understanding that they had in machine learning and AI and put that to good use. And, our mission today is stopping cyber criminals.
That's quite a task they took on. I mean, Twitter was bad enough, just to go and then tackle all email. That's quite something. So tell us, I talked about business email compromise. Can you tell us, what is business email compromise and how does it work?
Yeah, it's kind of a catchphrase for everything. You get a lot of different things that lump under BEC. It's kind of just been synonymous with all things phishing and spear phishing and account takeover. But, largely what it is, attackers look to leverage either, through social engineering or through account takeovers, interacting with other organizations and companies to try to get some financial gain out of it. It could be, fake invoices that are asked for processing. It could be social engineering where they ask, it's the fake CEO asking if you're at your desk and free to help out. Or it could even be what we're seeing as a subset of BEC is vendor email compromise, where most organizations deal with hundreds, if not thousands, of vendors and suppliers. And so while, the Amazons and Microsofts of the world do a great job of protecting their infrastructure and their email environments, not every supplier is the same. And so, an attacker, cyber criminal can break into some marketing email account that you do business with. They go through, they do all the reconnaissance and they see, hey, this user is doing business with company XYZ. So let's send them a fake invoice and see if they'll pay it. And so they're highly successful in those type of campaigns because there's that implicit level of trust because the victim is already dealing with that organization. They normally do business. They normally transact. And so, you already got that level of trust built in.
I think that one is particularly sinister, right? Because I think, I've been in large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies, and just like for example, telco bill. There's just like so thousands of line items of things, and so many bills come in, and like I've seen it where like one company I worked at, we had a whole office that was shut down, and we're still paying for the circuit a year later, and we found out that all the equipment had been stolen. It's like like you can lose track of stuff really really quickly. But that invoice piece, I gotta imagine it works really effectively.
It happens to all sorts of organizations. And so in 2013 to 2015, there was a Lithuanian criminal that stole over $100 million from Google and Facebook with fake invoices. And so he pretended to be a computer company, racked up the invoices, sent them to AP. They got paid. And, you think Google and Facebook, those are great companies. They spend a lot of money on cyber defense. And yet, they were both taken for a total of $100 million worth of fake invoices.
That's crazy. Sandesh, let's take a note here because that seems a lot easier than actually trying to sell stuff.
Well, just side note, he was caught and he is in jail. So, cybercrime doesn't pay.
No, he probably lived well for a while. So how big a problem is this?
We often get asked, hey, what type of industry vertical does your solution play best with? And my answer is always kind of a funny yet true. Any industry, any organization that deals with email, that pays invoices through email, that does any sort of business through email, that's how pervasive it is. And you see it. You see it whether it's state and local governments, whether it's universities, whether it's large corporations, small corporations. Nobody's immune to this. And I think part of the problem is email was never designed for how it's being used today. It was never designed to be this conduit for all business for things like sending invoices or, sending sensitive information. It was largely intended just to be a very non-secure way to communicate, much like you and I are talking here on this podcast.
Yeah. You like you said, email wasn't set up to be secure. And we've really paid, and like a lot of things on the internet, a lot of protocols on the internet weren't originally set up to deal with the world that we're living in now. So, we do have the complexity of trying to shut that down. And I'll tell you from, all the customers I talk to, that phishing piece and email compromises are like the number one thing top of mind for everybody. Absolutely. We talked a little bit about, like the fake invoices, but like what other kinds of, like really effective business email compromises are you guys seeing out there?
Yeah, we see a lot of them. What we see is, they look benign on the surface, but it's just the simple, fake CEO email saying, hey, Chris, I need your help. Let me know when you're back at your desk. And so, there's no malicious links. There's no attachment, nothing, it's a very benign email. But what the attackers want to do is for you to respond and say, hey, I'm back. What's up? And then they start building that rapport and establishing that credibility. And then eventually they'll hit you for the hook. And it could be a variety of things. It could be, hey, I need an invoice paid. It could just be, hey, I need that AR aging report. We're also seeing a lot of that where, the attacker is hitting your company, but they're not necessarily, you're not the victim. And what they'll do is they'll ask for things that provide certain level of sensitive information. Maybe it is a account receivable aging report that shows here's the accounts that owe us money. And then the attacker is going to turn around and hit those particular organizations on that report and pretend to be you. And then they add that additional layer of credibility because now they know dollar amounts, they know the vendor name, they know that you do business with them. And so they're going to impersonate you. They're going to go hit the third victim and say, hey, just wanted to see if you could go ahead and pay up on that bill that's due.
Wow, that is tricky. And you said, and one of the things that we talked about before was the idea of, you talk about establishing rapport. Like that's sort of the initial goal of some of these emails so that there's not a lot of like really identifiably malicious stuff in these emails. And another tactic I know that they have also been using is to sort of get it off of the email side of things onto other platforms like, like call me at this number type of things to sort of move it outside to a place where they can more easily attack from, right?
Absolutely. I mean, all forms of communication are fair game. We even saw earlier or late last year where they were using QR codes and, quishing. I mean, who would have ever thought in this day and age,
Quishing.
that the attackers are going to leverage a QR code? But think about it, with the COVID-19 pandemic, what did everybody move to? We moved away from paper, we moved to QR codes. And so now there's just this kind of, automatic processing where if I see a QR code, I'm likely to pull out my phone and click on, take the picture and click on the link.
And QR codes are so pervasive right now. And I think that's going to really trip a lot of people up because we're seeing them in advertisements on TV, scan this QR code. So I think people don't think that could be a potential infection vector, right?
At the end of the day, the attackers are going to use what is low risk, high reward for them. So if they find that those work, they're going to go that route. And, that's a lot of why we see email as a continued attack vector.
Yeah.
Most organizations allow email to come into their company. They don't block, large swaths of email addresses. They may block, particular, malicious emails that have been seen in multiple campaigns, but the bad guys, that's not the way they do it anymore. They're not using the same email domain or email address for multiple campaigns. It's spin it up, use it once, burn it down, and move on to the next one.
Well, that combined with the fact that, there's so much coming from like Gmail, for example, everybody, between Office 365 and Gmail, there's so many email addresses that originate from them. It has got to be really hard to disambiguate what's malicious and what's not, right?
Well, it makes it challenging. It's like anything else. The world, corporate America has moved to Google and Microsoft for hosted email. And as such, the attackers have also moved there because there's an implicit level of trust, a certain level of trust between, Microsoft trusting other Office 365 accounts and Google trusting Google. And so, if I'm an attacker and I want to go after you and I know you use Office 365, I'm going to spin up a Office 365 tenant and use that to start launching my attacks at you.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people get caught by that stuff. I mean, it can happen to the best of them. I mean, there's the one guy who does the scam busting up of, he puts like kind of a honeypot out there and he busts sort of Indian call centers that are, scam operations, right? And he got caught, and you look at somebody who's, very sophisticated in that regard and constantly being attacked and constantly aware of it. But he got, nailed in a they posed as a Google support, a YouTube support agent, and just got him, and he lost his channel. It's amazing.
And that's it. And that's why the social engineering aspect is so difficult to deal with, because you're expecting something, they're preying upon that, and they're taking advantage of it. I used to. My former company, I was a CISO at a large bank. And so I could always, when I did phishing simulations, things like that, if I did the fake FedEx or fake UPS, I could get, a ton of people to click on it because, who's not expecting Amazon to drop a delivery off at your front porch? And so it's back to that. Well, I thought that I was supposed to be getting something. And much like this guy, he probably thought somebody at YouTube was going to be contacting him for something. And so he fell for it.
We have a client that Chris and I work with very, very closely. It's a CIO at a local company here in Chicago. And we did a trip to the Silicon Valley. We went to Greylock and some other VCs, and the CIO met a bunch of startups. He met like 18 in like 2 days. As a result, we introduced the customer to Abnormal. He bought it within like 3 weeks, I think it was. It was the quickest POC I've ever seen. He was your customer number 5. He's a huge fan. I talked to him today, and he wanted me to let you know that thanks for doing what you guys do. He said that he is counting 400,000 attacks stopped by Abnormal. That's what he's recording, right? So anyways, it was a great story. It was great to know you guys super early. I think you guys obviously clearly have a great thing going on in the market. My question is a little bit more around what Chris was saying before, like how big of a problem is this, right? And so to me, what I'm trying to figure out is, my understanding is the biggest threat vector is email, correct?
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
Yeah. What are the percentages? Like what are the like the data around it? Is there like, can you quantify that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, IC3 keeps really good stats on how many they get reported. And, the thing to keep in mind when you even look at IC3, that's all voluntary. And so, we have a lot of things like data breaches that we have laws and regulations in place that require, people to raise their hand when they have a data breach. Your problem with email compromise and business email compromise is 9 times out of 10, it's not going to trigger a mandatory reporting event. And so most organizations don't want to raise their hand and say, hey, I paid $100,000 fake invoice to a bad guy and I had to eat that. And so what we see, I like to think probably what you see from IC3 and others is probably 25% of what really happens out there.
Wow.
And so even at that level and that amount, it's crazy to think of it. We keep track of our stats and keep in mind, we're still a relatively young and unknown company. But just to date, we've stopped over $200 million worth of business email compromise type of attacks that have hit our customers alone. And so the numbers are pretty crazy. We're not pervasive across Fortune 500 at this point. We will be, but we're not there yet. But even that dollar amount is crazy on how many attacks we've stopped.
And that's why I think the timing of this conversation is great. I think more people do need to know about you. I think, Chris, and that's part of our initiative here because we're seeing this problem, right? And there's so many security vendors out there right now that I think customers are getting a little bit lost in like, geez, they're forgetting who does what. And so what we're trying to do for them is give them the cliff notes, right? Like, hey, when it comes to email phishing, these are the guys you got to be looking at, and that's where you got to narrow in on. But it sounds like if that's the number one threat vector, like it just really gets me thinking like how much money is being spent on email security? Like are customers using multiple tools? Are they just using you? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so it's one of those things that it's not a one size fits all. So we have a lot of customers that have a traditional secure email gateway. And what they're finding is there's still a pretty decent percentage of attacks that are getting through. And so they'll layer us on top and close that gap down. We also have customers that leverage, the built-in native security of Google or Microsoft. And we come on top of that. And then, we do have a new product called ICES, ICES. It's the Integrated Cloud Email Security. It's a term that Gartner actually came up with, and it's kind of been a focal point for Gartner. But with that solution, we actually have the ability to take on, the gray mail. We can essentially replace the SEG and be that sole solution that you have for your email security for the enterprise.
Yeah. So why do you guys win? Like, what is the thing that you get from customers of like, we bought Abnormal because of this thing?
Well, I'll go back and give you my personal story. So, I don't think I mentioned this at the beginning, but I was also a customer. I was probably somewhere between 20 and 25th customer, plugged it in at a large bank and just saw the success. I mean, for starters, most email solutions, I'm going to have to do some things that could potentially impact mail routing. I'm going to have to change my MX record. I'm going to have to change mail flow. With Abnormal Security, it literally was three minutes to plug it in. It's essentially all API driven, and you're off to the races. They came back about 10 days later, and they showed me all the things in my environment that my traditional email security defenses missed. And it was pretty eye-opening to see, hey, here's attacks getting through. And not only here are attacks getting through, but here are employees in your organization interacting with cyber criminals. And so it's one thing for it to get through and it's sitting in an inbox and someone deleted it or not interact with it. But it's another thing when I have people replying back to them and starting to engage and doing all those things that they know if they can get you to do it, they're going to have a high likelihood of getting some financial gain out of your organization. And so, I replaced Abnormal Security, or I replaced my existing solution with Abnormal Security. Loved it, loved what the founders were doing, loved where the company was going. And really, I'd been at my last organization for several years and thought, I'd love to go join what they're building. It's exciting. And why not have an impact across, hundreds, if not thousands of organizations instead of just focus on one? And so that's why I joined them last April. And it's been a blast ever since.
Well, I think that's a great segue to talk about, how does Abnormal Security work and how do you prevent these emails? I mean, like we mentioned earlier, the complexity is way up there because, distinguishing the signal from the noise and all this has got to be extraordinarily challenging. Can you touch on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, first and foremost, we have a lot of really smart data scientists. We have some really smart engineers. We've built a great product, just leveraging a lot of knowledge and experience across a lot of big organizations. I mean, it's not just our founders that did ad tech, but, we have people from Amazon, we have people from Proofpoint, Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, you name it. We bring in a lot of really great talent to help us build this solution.
Yeah.
Ultimately it works by, plugging into the API, being able to interrogate messages coming in near real time, being able to process it in memory, being able to look at just an extreme number of signals. Right now we're looking at anywhere from 50 to 60,000 signals per email. A lot of it determines based upon, have we ever seen this email before? Has this person ever engaged? We do natural language processing of the content of the email. All of it to kind of build that full holistic picture of, is this a normal email or is this an abnormal email? And, if it's abnormal, then we stop it and don't let your end user engage in it. And if it's a completely normal, legitimate email, then we let it go and business as usual.
So one of the big differentiators you talk about is the human behavioral security engine. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, so it's a couple things. It's, we look at, your CEO's name is Bob Smith, and he normally emails you on these 2 or 3 email addresses. All of a sudden, he's emailing you from a never before seen Gmail account. So that is something that's abnormal. Or, Bob Smith emails you from San Francisco, California every time, and then all of a sudden he's emailing you from Pakistan. Well, that's not normal.
Yeah.
Or, maybe somebody is emailing you, asking you about invoices, and they've never emailed you before about invoices. Or maybe they're now using a sense of urgency in the language. Or they've got banking or financial information in the email, and we've never seen these type of things before. And so that builds kind of that behavioral user engine to say, just all by itself doesn't mean that it's malicious, but these are things that aren't normal. We've not seen these before. This is highly indicative of something that could be malicious.
So you talk about, like how you can sit on top of other solutions and things like that. And you talk about a SEG, which secure email gateway. Can you talk about how do you sit in the chain, right? Because you mentioned you don't have to change up email routing to do this. How does that all work?
Yeah, it's all API driven. So part of what you do is, when you want to look at abnormal and do a proof of value or a risk assessment, we'll give you a link. You put in credentials. What it does is if you're in the Microsoft world, it creates an application in your Azure environment. And from there, it's able to leverage the Graph API and make calls and interrogate emails as they're coming in. Very similar technology on the Google side. And so that's how we sit in your ecosystem. We sit in your environment. Your email stays in your tenant. We do our interrogation in memory. And then if it's a malicious email, we'll take further action from there.
Considering the level of attacks that are happening now, and I'd be curious to hear, what sort of success rates you have. I mean, obviously that, the one customer we have that's getting, blocking 400,000, malicious emails, that says a lot. But, what sort of, how much are you catching?
Yeah, I mean, we're catching an amazing amount of attacks that are getting through, and we still probably a big chunk of our customers are still using some other technology behind us. And so, or actually they're in front of us and we're behind them. So just the fact that we're catching anything, is indicative of, the current solution's not working, and we're stopping a ton of attacks. I've probably got more, things from customers where they've, praised Abnormal for stopping something malicious coming through than, I can even count. And it's been just tremendous to see, happy customers, protecting customers, because ultimately at the end of the day, these are businesses that we're dealing with, but businesses are comprised of people. And so, you think of all the impact, not only to the organization, but to the individual. If you fall for a phishing attack or you pay a fake invoice, that's a lot of stress and anguish and worry about your job and things like that. And just to kind of, remove that worry from the employees of our customers, that's a great sense and pride in what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think it's very hard because when you're in the IT world, you're kind of used to hearing about these things. So you're maybe perhaps a little bit more on the alert, but what you're doing is you're trying to solve a problem for people who may not be sophisticated users, right? Who may be, people in the finance office who don't, ever think about the implications of email security or cybersecurity, or really pay attention to like the amount of attacks that are happening, right? So that's got to be really helpful for folks like that.
Not to say that IT people can't be victims,
Yeah.
but it is typically people that move money and deal with payments, or maybe your HR team or someone in the business. And so even though most organizations have, all the awareness training and phishing simulations and things like that, there's still a reason why the social engineering aspect is very effective. It triggers that, that kind of fight or flight or desire to be helpful. And all that training kind of goes out the window at a moment of stress or need.
Well, and you mentioned that, the human behavioral security engine picks up on some of the language and sort of the semantics of some of these social engineering conversations. Could you talk a little bit about how do you distinguish what is social engineering from what's just sort of normal conversation?
Yeah, I think some of it is the frequency. So, if you and I constantly have conversations with a sense of urgency, or, if I deal with you on a regular basis and I'm asking for financial payments and things like that, then that's a normal interaction between you and I.
Yeah.
Now, all of a sudden, here comes another person that you don't have those type of interactions with, and they're using that similar language. Well, there's something abnormal about that.
Right.
And so, we look through, there's certain terms, you see them. And part of what we do is we have a threat research and threat intelligence team that looks at these type of attacks too. And so, we constantly feed back into our models. And so we understand, the types of language and trigger words that are, that typically are a precursor to someone asking for money or a fake invoice or some sort of a cyber attack on email.
Well, and I think the other thing too that you mentioned about this that I think is interesting is the idea of sort of, having layers of defense, right? And because I got to imagine this is just incredibly complicated. And if you look at it like, the Microsofts and Googles, they see a lot. They also have to try to block a lot. So I got to imagine that's, sort of a Sisyphean challenge in that there's only so much they can do with, on their end. And I would imagine quite a bit still gets through, which is why, taking it from a more layered approach might be a good way to think about it, huh?
When you're looking at commodity stuff, and don't get me wrong, there's still a lot of the commodity stuff that just gets recycled because, it's cheap and easy and somebody out there is going to click on it. But when it comes to commodity type stuff that's been seen a lot before, that's, well documented, well baked into signatures and things like that, Microsoft, Google, your SEGs, they all do a really good job of stopping those. The problem is bad guys also know that they've stopped them. And so they've pivoted to other things that aren't getting stopped. And that's where abnormal comes in, because we're not a signature-based solution. So we're not looking at things that have been seen before, but we're leveraging that anomaly detection. We're leveraging the behavior analytics. We're leveraging the artificial intelligence to really be able to hone in on those things that, this is the first time that this Gmail account has ever been used to attack someone. We're going to stop it.
I mean, it sounds like, quite an important problem to be solving. And I know that so many of the executives that I talk to, that's like the number one item on their list. So thank you for doing the hard work on that front. But what do you see as being next for Abnormal? Where are you guys going to go from here?
It's just like anything else. If you stop the problem on email, attackers are going to pivot to something else. And so really our vision and future for the company, one, we want to be the premier solution for business email compromise, email security, but we're also going to grow and pivot into being kind of the, back office corporate SaaS security provider. So, everybody's moved into the SaaS world. Everybody uses the Workdays, the Salesforce, Asanas, you name it, Slack. And so we want to take those same learnings and that same knowledge and that same artificial intelligence and natural language processing user behavior detection, and we want to move it into other SaaS providers to help with account takeovers, to help with any malicious activity happening there as well.
Wow, that's interesting. And then, and I got to imagine that's going to give you some really interesting visibility into a lot of different problems too, I would imagine.
Absolutely. Probably some we don't even know about today.
Yeah, that's a little frightening to think about. I mean, because, we're all, we're all with the Russian invasion. We're sort of all facing a heightened sense of security right now. And just, we were talking earlier about, kind of waiting for that other foot to drop on some of these cyber attacks. So, it's definitely top of mind for a lot of folks in the industry, and I think we're all just kind of sitting here, a little white knuckling it, see what happens next, right?
You don't know what you don't know, but I feel good. I feel like we've got really solid technology. We've got really smart people that are looking to solve problems. So, I really feel like for the first time, we really have a good shot at making a dent in cybercrime.
Keep up the good work, because man, we desperately need the help, all the help we can get. And Mike, thanks so much for being on. I really appreciate what you guys are doing. We've heard great things about you in the field, and keep up the good work, and stay in touch.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for watching. Love to hear from you in the comments. And if you like what you saw, please give us a like. Think about subscribing, because that helps the channel a ton. And I will see you in the next video.